The creature then made me tea and vanished into the night. That's funny. Mine appeared in my dreams and sang show tunes. They must be one and the same.
Well, that's crap.
What? What happened to you?
He impaled me on a tree and made me write show tunes and steep tea leaves.
A monster in a traditional horror story hunts the characters down one by one, fills them with fear for their lives, then finishes the job. A creature that shows kindness is something entirely worse. It proves that the thing is more than instinct, that it has a philosophical view of the world and operates on principles. When a creature like that strikes you down, you aren't just prey. You are representative of an idea being snuffed out. Hyperion by Dan Simmons is a sci-fi novel about 7 pilgrims traveling to the Shrike. It's said 6 of them won't return, and 1 will be granted a wish. But this book isn't about the destination. It's about the characters on the journey, and what their stories tell us about the creature waiting in the tombs. The novel reminds me of an old fable about 6 blind men and an elephant. Each man touches a part of the elephant. One touches the tusk and says it's like a spear. Another touches the side and says it's like a wall. And at the end, each one accurately describes a piece of the elephant. But the sum total, the whole of the animal, is something much greater than any one of them witnessed. In most horror stories, the monster of the piece rarely walks out into the open. And when it does, it's usually very late into the story. The reason for this is that usually creatures are nothing more than killing machines. When we see a monster's complete self, our brain sort of processes it and says, "Oh, I understand that. That's something I can make sense of. That's not so scary." In this book, the body of the Shrike is shown early on and in complete detail. Because what the Shrike is, what it represents, is so much more than just another monster. The first story of the Hyperion follows a priest. Father Dure is investigating a strange tribe of not-so-smart humanoids. He suspects they're the inbred products of a crashed siege ship from centuries ago. Instead, he discovers that these almost people are in fact the original passengers, infected by a parasite that revives them after every death, and when they're brought back, destroys parts of their brain. Eventually, Father Dure is taken down into Hyperion's great underground labyrinth, where he meets with the Shrike, full-bodied and standing before him. A minute later, the priest is cursed with the same parasitic immortality. In the face of eternal, thoughtless life, Father Dure ties himself to an electrified tree, and for 7 years dies again and again until the parasite finally relents and Father Dure breathes his final breath. The Shrike's main title is Lord of Pain. In a single story, it's earned that title. In most cases, immortality would be the most grand of gifts, but in the hands of the Shrike, it's poisoned and perverted into something near slavery. Fitting that the only escape from the Shrike's curse is to suffer on a tree, mirroring the Shrike's punishment of eternity on its tree of thorns. The second story tells of Faidman Kassad, a career military man. The story draws a line through Kassad's life. A woman named Moneta appears to him even in the most impossible of circumstances, and on each visitation, the two's romance blooms, eventually forming something like love. Kassad is given visions of an intergalactic war, of the Shrike phasing through time to wipe out entire armies. Even Moneta herself briefly takes on the form of the creature, and the nature of who Moneta is blurred. It teaches the reader there's more to the Shrike than cruelty. There might even be love. Its reach extends even into dreams. And as for the Shrike's goals, bigger and grander than any normal monster. Conquest and cruelty on the scale of billions. The first two stories cast the Shrike as something formidable, a truly horrific thing, but not a legend. For the Shrike to rise to the level of legend, it has to cross from the physical plane and into the abstract. Martin Silenus is a poet. He's got a fun journey. A part of it is even inspired by George Carlin's 7 words you can't say on TV. But eventually, he finds himself living in the city of poets, working on his great epic. But with every step forward Martin makes in his story, the Shrike takes the life of another of the city's population. It's his muse. Martin knows it. Every page means another dead body. A part of him starts to wonder if the creature isn't just a creature, but a thing made manifest by his story. Most folks agree the Shrike was probably sent backwards in time. It gives some explanation for the Shrike's extraordinary abilities and range of influence. But now, with the story of Martin Silenus, there's another possibility. The possibility that the Shrike is a product of deep creative thought. And since the Shrike is more idea than substance, it doesn't have to follow the rules of the universe. As if to reassert that claim, the story of Soul Wine Tribe takes place entirely in the realm of dreams. This story is heartbreaking, like a really tragic version of Benjamin Button. But we'll stay focused on the Shrike's involvement. Over 20 years, the Shrike appears in Soul Wine Tribe's dreams and recreates the biblical story of Abraham. In this case, the red eyes of the Shrike demand Soul Wine Tribe sacrifice his own daughter. At this point, the Shrike is literally donning the garb of a god, a behavior well beyond your standard evil monster. The last two stories are less about fleshing out the Shrike and more about how humanity seeks to use the Shrike's extraordinary reach and unpredictability as a weapon. And this is where the plot of the rest of the Hyperion series starts to sneak in. Hyperion is really the story of the tense almost allies of humanity and the Technocore, AIs. Both sides can see as the years go by, the likelihood of the Technocore's complete domination of the galaxy is steadily climbing to inevitability. The one unknown in the galaxy, the one thing capable of tipping the war in one direction or the other, is the Shrike. We discover from the tale of the Consul that one of the pilgrims is a traitor, a person coming to the time tombs with the intent to unseal them and unshackle the Shrike, to reintroduce unpredictability in a nearly solved equation. The Shrike isn't just a creature, it isn't just a villain, it's a third party in a two-party war. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, and in the Hyperion, this cruel, metal, spiky creature is a thing humanity is prepared to roll the dice with. Dan Simmons, the author of the Hyperion series, embraces humanity's myths in the telling of his story. The stories of Abraham, the battle between the Titans and the gods, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, a story of 6 blind men and an elephant, even George Carlin's comedy sets, all come together to tell a story that rises above your standard sci-fi epic and into the realm of classical epics. The story of Hyperion ends with the pilgrims walking down into the Valley of the Shrike. You'd think it'd be a cliffhanger, but when I finished reading the book, it felt complete. 6 characters coming to terms with their own lives, their own journeys, and then going to meet this legend, this monster, this god that had visited all their lives, the Shrike. I have 4 friends that read this book. Of the 4, only one of them read past it. When I asked them why, they all gave the same answer. How could a sequel possibly live up to the original? And I like to think that when they said that, they were specifically referring to the Shrike. That Dan Simmons had made such a widespread, cruel and kind, physical and abstract, omnipotent legend of a creature that showing it more, that expanding it past its mythical status, could only diminish the thing. To a degree, it's true. In the sequel, the more the Shrike speaks, the more it participates in the narrative, the less you fear it. But Dan Simmons has a fix. A story can craft the most fearsome legend of a creature, but if it has no goal, no vision beyond cruelty, then it's nothing but a monster. This is what the sequel resolves, and what cements the Shrike's status. Grand, cruel purpose. A campaign that sparks fear in the heart. An idea worse than any monster, and the thing that elevates the Shrike from terror to legend. Thank you for watching.